It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Property Podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rob Bence. With me, as always, is Rob Dix. Hey Rob, how are you today?
Very well, thank you. Here in rainy London town. It's a bank holiday when we're recording this, so it has to be raining. There's some kind of bylaw about it. But other than that, really good. This week, we're going to be asking, what is your time worth? So maybe you can start invoicing us for listening to the podcast. We've also got a resource of the week and a news story that will appeal to you if you consider yourself a yuppie.
Okay, so before we get going, let's have a look at the iTunes reviews. Thank you very much to the following people. First up, JCN68 says, so informative, 5 stars. The Property Podcast is excellent. Every week, a huge range of practical advice is shared with listeners. I love that Rob and Rob are so open and happy to share their own experiences. I'm teetering on the edge of taking the plunge into property investment. Living in a rural location, I'm deliberating between a cottage to rent as a holiday cottage. Do you have any experience or advice on holiday letting? Thank you for the great support you've given so far. Well, this review was left in March because we're just catching up and we've done holiday lettings in the last few episodes. So JCN68, your requests have been answered. Okay, so Meredith says, different gravy. I love that. About a week ago, I discovered the Property Hub, and from there, I found the amazing podcast to listen to too. This has been one of them. It's obvious from mentioning the Property Hub, you may have guessed I have an interest in property and expect to hear lots of interesting information about property from this podcast. But to start with episodes 53, 52 and 51, I've heard some inspiring and motivational interviews with great questions and insights. That's been a welcome surprise. And I have a huge interest in business themselves. I currently work a 7 to 5 job as a carpenter, but I now feel more driven than ever to set my dream line, chase my goals and lifestyle choice. Start a business or businesses and invest in property. Thank you so much for starting these podcasts, giving up your precious time and helping people like myself realise their dreams and make steps towards them. Rob and Rob, you are legends. We didn't pay for that one. Thank you very much. I love the headline, different gravy. I think that's my favourite one so far. And Sesto23 says, awesome podcast. Guys, what a great podcast. Really inspiring, not only for property investors, but for anybody getting started in their own business. You give out great advice, really useful resources, and most important, you give us courage and motivation to take action. I'm giving you 5 stars as a way of thanking you for all the great work you've done so far. I would give you 10 stars if I could. Keep crushing it, guys. Wowzers, there's some good ones this week. Thank you so much.
That's awesome, thank you. And it's really good to recognise some names from the Property Hub as well. I recognise Sesto and Louis Meredith. It's really great that people are finding the Property Hub and then coming over to the podcasts from there as well as the other way around.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We've got about 1,000 members now in the Property Hub. So that's just fantastic. It's less than 6 months old and there's over 1,000 active accounts there. So that's just absolutely brilliant. So thank you to all our Hub members too.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the Hub a little bit because a couple of items of news relating to that. First of all, we have started an Ask Us Anything thread over in the Property Hub. The idea is we want to encourage people who've got a specialist area of knowledge to start a thread inviting people to ask them questions about that thing. So that could be some solicitors or surveyors, or it could just be if you've got in-depth knowledge of a particular area or tenant type or anything. So we want to encourage that. We thought it was only fair to start off ourselves. So if you do want to ask us anything, get over to the Property Hub. We'll be asking anything, although we amended it after a little while to ask us anything about property, just to cover ourselves. But do get over there. There's a link in the show notes, which this week are at thepropertyhub.net/time.
Yeah, so we're really looking forward to that. And also, we've added more to the Property Hub Plus, and we've started office hours. So what's office hours? It's basically Rob and I open ourselves up for a few hours every week to talk about property. So we give you access to our diary. You can book a time in, and we can talk about property. or business, whichever you prefer, or lettings, or, whatever side of it. We're fortunate that we've got experience in a few different areas. If it's anything to do with refurbs, I'm probably not the man because I struggle to change a light bulb. But anything property investment strategy, anything like that, I'm more than happy to help. Rob's got fantastic experience as well. We've both got similar aspects, and we've also got a little bit different as well in some of the things we've done. So take advantage of that Plus members. It's free. It's included in part of your membership. Hopefully that's very popular too.
And just to say, please don't ask me about refurbs either. And also this week, we've been doing some interviewing as well. So we've been interviewing for a hire for Yellow Lettings. I think we've mentioned on the podcast in the past what amazing applications we had. We've had a really tough time getting it down, but we're very close to making our decision now for what's a really important decision for us. I'm going to say the future of Yellow is looking bright. Nothing to do with us, but just the talent that we're able to take on. It's amazing.
Yeah, we've pretty much identified who we want to take on. So hopefully they will say yes. And then we're going to be, very excited to tell you more in the coming weeks. And also RMP has been on the hire trail. So I mentioned this a few weeks ago. We've done our final interviews, and I'm about to ask somebody to come on board as well. And I'll be able to give you more information in the coming weeks as well. We're just waiting for them to say yes. We've keeping ourselves busy, Rob.
We certainly are. Okay, let's move on to our news story then. So this week, top towns for yuppies. This one's from the BBC, and they've identified the most popular areas for what they're calling yuppies, which they've defined as career-minded 25 to 44-year-olds. What they found that is in these areas, loved by young professionals, they can end up paying a premium of as much as 63% over other homes in the area.
Yeah, career-minded 25 to 40-year-olds. What does that actually mean?
It's very broad, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very broad. How they define that, I have no idea. But anyway, it makes for an interesting headline and some interesting stats. So Wimbledon comes up as top. And in Wimbledon, the average price paid by yuppies is £534,999, which is a price premium of 13%. And then, actually, if you look at it, the majority of the areas are actually in London, which doesn't really come as a surprise because there's a lot of people, working hard between 25 and 40, which is why probably a lot of London came up, but the same with a lot of other cities. So, bit of a strange one, but the stats are quite interesting and the headline grabbed us. So, I promise next week we might come out with something a little stronger, but good headline, weak content. A bit like the property podcast.
Oh, don't say that.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so let's get moving on to the topic of the week. And we are asking this week, what is your time worth? We talk about outsourcing a fair bit, and depending on how much you outsource, but even if you do, property can be a pretty time-intensive form of investment compared to just investing passively in another asset class like shares. So between researching and viewings and the general acquisition process and doing all that lovely paperwork, it could easily take you 50 hours or more just to buy a single property. And that's before you even start with the management. So if you have a job, then you're probably giving up your leisure time to make a property investment. If you're self-employed, then you're directly using time in which you could be working and earning money. Either way, you're giving up some of the most limited resource we have, which is time. And given that, it's crazy that most of us tend not to consciously put a value on our time. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at why valuing your time is important, how to do it, and hopefully come out making some better decisions about the activities that we do and we don't do as a result.
This is something Rob and I'd say are good at. We are very focused on our time and making it work to our advantage as best we can. But we know when we shouldn't be doing tasks. Are we perfect? No, far from it. But I'd say we're pretty focused on this. And I think you can learn a lot from this podcast. So before we get into it, let's look at some of the common mistakes. So first of all, many people will spend time on activities which add little value or are just not important. Now, could somebody else be doing those types of activities for you? You probably think no, but you'd be surprised because in most cases the answer is yes. A prime example is Rob and I both use what we call VAs, virtual assistants. So a bit like PAs, but they don't sit at the other side of our desks. They work from wherever they like, but they help us do tasks that probably aren't best done by ourselves. That is one way you could do it. Now you might say, oh, well, I've got a normal job. How could I have a VA? Again, you'd be surprised. I know a lot of people who do. And maybe if you haven't, start with Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. We're going to mention that again in a bit, but that's really a great book for helping you learn about the value of your time and how to outsource it and be more effective with the time you have. Next is spending too long on low-value adding activities. So an activity that's not really going to add much to whatever you're trying to achieve, but you find it's draining a lot of your time and your hours. Also, taking on tasks that somebody else could do better and quicker, even though you've got to pay them. Because if somebody can do a better job and a quicker job, is it worth you spending hours and hours and hours to produce a poor result? And then finally, a lot of people don't clearly articulate the purpose of the task or their activity. Is it really going to help them achieve their goal? Or is there a different motivation, such as a passion project?
Okay, so that's where people go wrong. Let's start moving towards how to do it right. And that all starts by calculating the value of your time. And we've got a calculation to help you do that, courtesy of course, Tim Ferriss, who really changed a lot of people's thinking in this regard when it comes to optimizing your time, using virtual assistants and all that kind of thing in the 4-Hour Workweek back in 2006 now. Yeah, so much has been written about that in the years since then. Interest has really exploded in this whole area. But Tim is still the man when it comes to this kind of thing, and his calculation still absolutely applies. Because it's really simple. So here is the calculation. So start with the amount of money that you're earning in a year. So, for example, let's say that you're earning £50,000 a year. From there, you just chop off the last 3 zeros. So 50,000 becomes 50. And then you halve it. And so you end up with 25. And that 25 is your hourly rate. So this calculation basically assumes that you're working 50 weeks a year, 9 to 5. That's the basis of this calculation. So for everyone, it's going to be a little bit different, that it doesn't take into account, but the whole point is that it's very simple, and that's going to work for the majority of people. So that's a really easy way, whatever your salary, to work out what an hour of your time is worth. If you're self-employed, maybe you have got a better idea of what your time's worth already. Maybe you actually have an hourly rate that you charge out at. Or if you're some kind of consultant, maybe you track your time on a project so you know how long things take and you have another way of working it out. Whichever way you do it doesn't really matter. It's people who are employed and getting an annual salary who often find it the hardest. And the great thing about that calculation is it turns it into a 20-second process.
What's this 9 to 5 you mentioned, Rob?
It's some concept I've heard of, vaguely remember it from way back.
Yeah. I do have a memory of it. Yeah, the 4-hour work week. Someone once said to me, how's the 4-hour work week going? And it's a big con because you get more efficient and you just fit more in. You don't end up working 4 hours, you end up wearing more hours doing more. But at least you're efficient. Don't be fooled by the title. If you go and buy it, you suddenly think you're going to be working 4 hours. But I believe people have achieved it, just that Rob and I have seemed to go it the wrong way around. Okay, so what can we do to increase the value of your time? Well, let's look at the Pareto 80-20 rule. And that's 20% of the tasks you do add 80% of the value. So stop doing the other 80%. So 80-20. 20% of the things you do bring in 80% of your income. Okay, that's generally the rule. You'd be surprised, but it tends to work that way. Outsource to any tasks where the amount you would pay someone to do the task is less than your hourly worth. So, let me give you an example. If your hourly worth is £25 and it would take you 2 hours to clean your house, paying a cleaner an hourly rate of £12.50 would give you 100% return. Because the cleaner is going to take 2 hours, so that's £25, but in those 2 hours you could have earned 50. So you've made 100% return. Invest in the time you've saved by increasing your capabilities in high value adding areas and therefore increasing your hourly worth. Don't do tasks that you can outsource for less. You may think, well, actually, that's costing my money, but you're thinking about it the wrong way. If you can then spend those 2 hours you were going to be cleaning, educating yourself, bettering yourself, or even working more or longer hours to produce more income, then it's a better use of your time. Unless, of course, you love cleaning and it's a passion project of yours. But it's not mine, I have to say. And if you could see my desk now, the proof is there, I can assure you. Okay, so that's the 80-20 rule. Try and apply it in your life now in just a few small ways and see if it can make a difference for you.
Yeah, the key thing in there was investing your time to produce something better than you would have been able to do. So it often feels uncomfortable to outsource, to actually be paying money to someone to do a task that you know that you could do. And it's something that I've got better at over time. But I used to be like, oh, well, I can pay this outsourcer 50 quid to do this. But that seems like it's an unnecessary cost because I could do it. And that's because handing over money is a very visible thing to do, and you're aware that you're doing it. Whereas often the value that you create is harder to identify and you don't know you're doing it. So if you really are spending that time doing something that's going to have a payoff now or in the future, so even if you are just educating yourself, so instead of cleaning the house, you're learning something that you can apply in the future to make you a lot more money. It's very hard to tie it all in together. But if you can be confident that you are, then it's something that's worth doing. It's not always easy to actually put a value on it. And I think that's why people struggle a lot of the time. It's not often a case of, oh, well, if I pay this person to do 2 hours work, then I can do 2 hours overtime and earn more. It's not always that easy, but it does tend to work out. Okay, but this is the property podcast after all. So how does all this relate to property? The first part is really obvious. We talked about it before. It's using professionals to reduce the amount of time that you have to put in. A really obvious example is using a letting agent. So you know how much you're paying your agent. If you were doing the work yourself instead, then that would take you a certain number of hours every month. So depending on the hourly rate that you've worked out, it might make the money you're paying your letting agent seem like a better deal because you're like, oh, well, I think if I was doing it myself, it would take me 3 hours and I can use that time to earn X. That's a really obvious example. Same goes for something like a mortgage broker. So you might have to pay them a few hundred quid, but how many hours of your time would it take you to find an equivalent product and do everything that goes along with the application process? That's even assuming that you could find the equivalent product and have all that knowledge. So using professionals is a really obvious one. Another implication for property is things like big refurb projects and HMOs. Now, obviously, HMOs give you a bigger return on investment, but that's before you factor in your time. By the time you've worked out your hourly rate and logged all the time that you're spending on HMO over and above the time that you'd put into a normal let, how's your ROI then? The calculation becomes a lot more realistic if you actually factor in the cost of your time. And the final implication, Rob, one close to your heart, buying below market value. If you buy below market value and lock in that equity, it's effectively the same as if you bought something that needs a load of work doing to it and then do the refurb, but without having to actually spend the time doing the refurb.
Rob, funnily enough, I agree with all the points you've just said. Let's look at real-life examples. We like to think we know a little bit about property. We're involved in it in day-to-day in some aspect, one way or another. But we still use mortgage brokers. I deal in mortgages every day, but I still use a broker. We use solicitors. We did use, until Yellow Letting started, letting agents. You know, you've seen the light on that one, Rob. I believe you self-managed at one point, but then you've seen the error of your ways.
Now I'm just involved in managing properties for hundreds of other people.
Yeah, now you've gone full swing in madness. So, but the point is, we do it ourselves. We believe that even though we know a fair bit about property, there are still people who know far more than us in their related fields. And it's a far better use of their time and our time to employ them to do what they're good at, and then we can get on with what we're good at. So using brokers and letting agents, yes, you would expect us to say that, but if you listen back to the podcast, we said use letting agents before Yellow Lettings was even an idea. It's something that we believe you should do. So have a think about it. Start with property. Look at your portfolio currently. Is there aspects of your portfolio that you could be outsourcing now, either in terms of acquiring or, running the portfolio? And if so, start to take action, and then look into other areas of your life as well and see what else you can make changes with, because just applying a few little bits and pieces here and there can have a big impact on your life.
Yeah, definitely. And we're not saying don't do HMOs, don't do developments, all that kind of thing. Absolutely do, but look at it realistically. Don't get blinded by the headline number and fail to factor in your time. If you go into it with eyes open and you've actually taken your time into account and it's still something you want to do, then absolutely go for it. We're not saying don't do it. And the same goes for anything else. And also the same goes for if there are things you enjoy. It is okay to have passion projects and it's okay to do things that you like doing, just so long as you're aware that there are other ways of doing things. And I'm sure there's plenty in your life that you don't enjoy that much. If you can find a way of outsourcing it or removing it in some way, then that's definitely something you should do. And as Rob said, it goes way beyond property as well. So we've given you lots of property examples, but it's going to apply in lots of different areas as well.
Okay, so our resource of the week directly links into this. Now, first of all, I think it's kind of two resources. We mentioned Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, so we'll link to that in the show notes, because if you haven't read that, that is a must. Although it's about outsourcing, it very, very much relates to property. The 4-Hour Workweek would be the first one. But also, Andy Ridley, who's one of the team members at RMP Property, you may have heard him on the Property News Radio podcast. He has put a blog together for the Property Hub, Rob, and it's rather good.
It is very good, and it is absolutely about what we've just been talking about. Andy did a refurb project very successfully, and then at the end of it, he went back and looked at the amount of time he put into it, assigned an hourly rate to that time, and worked out how much of the big profit that he made was absorbed by the cost of his own time. We shouldn't say any more than that, because for the conclusion, you should go and read the post. And you should go and read the post anyway, because it's a really great breakdown. So go and have a look. It couldn't be more relevant to what we've just talked about. So go over to the propertyhub.net/blog and have a read of that. It's going to be the first in a series of a few posts that Andy's doing about the project, and they're all really fascinating. It's really nice to get the inside track on this kind of thing, because people are doing projects like this every day, but it's not often that you actually see them broken down in that much detail. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. As we've alluded to, we aren't the refurb people. This blog gives a lot of information about the refurb project, and the few articles that are coming out will. But this type of breakdown in this level of detail is rarely done. So make sure you go and have a look at this blog, because it's very, very good. Next week, Rob, more into focused property stuff again, and it's mortgages. Tips, tricks, and things you need to know.
Yep, it's going to be a good one. So do join us again next week for that. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Do get over to the show notes for this episode if you would like to check out anything that we've talked about. And if you want to join in the discussion about this episode, which happens over on the Property Hub, there's a link to do that from the show notes as well. So the show notes for this week are thepropertyhub.net/time.
Super. Well, that's us for another week. We'll see you next week when we cover mortgages. But until then, everyone, I hope the rain stops. We keep jinxing the weather one way or another every time we mention it. So actually, Rob, we should have a weather ban for a few weeks. I know we're British, but we'll have to give it a rest on that. But until next week, everyone, have a fantastic time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.